They've been calling it the COVID-15, extra pounds that were packed on during the pandemic. With summer around the corner, feelings of disappointment and disgust can sometimes wash over us. Body image issues are a common source of anguish for many people. Joining us is author Alyson Gerber, who will be releasing her new book, Taking Up Space, just next month. And Alyson, I think this is a wonderful book, but I'd like for you to tell people who your audience is.
Thank you so much for having me. Taking Up Space is the story of a basketball player who is struggling to feel good about her body and herself. It's based on my struggles overcoming body image, food, and self-worth. And the audience for this book is 8 to 14-year-olds and the adults who are in their lives. So that could be teachers, librarians, parents, grandparents, really anyone.
And what are you seeing in terms of, I mean, you dealt with your own body image issues. I'd like for us to talk a bit about that, but for a lot of young children, it seems like younger and younger, there's a lot of pressure to look a certain way.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we all feel that pressure, and that pressure starting at a younger age. I mean, the statistics really show that kids as young as 8 are feeling like they want to be thinner, and they feel better when they're on a diet, which is something we really need to work to reverse. Mm-hmm. And it's upsetting for our society and for our culture, where we should really be placing value on the kind of person that we want our children to be: kind and capable and strong and resilient.
That's right. And tell us about your own journey. Now, you say that you've also suffered from eating disorders.
So I've never been diagnosed with an eating disorder, but I did struggle for most of my life with disordered eating, which is not a medical diagnosis. So this can be a little bit tricky and confusing. Disordered eating is sort of irregular eating behaviors or a preoccupation with food. And so for me, food took up all the space in my mind. It started because I wore a back brace for scoliosis, which really distorted the way that I viewed myself. I also had undiagnosed attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So having undiagnosed ADHD made me feel bad about myself, and I didn't ever really learn to value myself based on anything other than what was on the outside. And food became a way that I could focus on something I could control. I think this is very common, especially in traumatic situations, in distress. I started therapy and actually had a relapse when I was pregnant with my daughter. It was very triggering. It brought back a lot of the feelings that I had as an adolescent, where your body is changing and you're not in control. And so that was the point at which I really said, I'm going to bring another person into this world. And I knew the statistics for kids with parents who struggle with food, that they're much more likely to struggle with food. And I really wanted to manage it and deal with it in that moment. So I started therapy, and I also used writing as a tool. I wrote into my pain. I highly recommend that for anyone who's struggling, to ask for help, get professional help, and also put your feelings down on paper. It really helps to make it the truth and to make it real. And I think sometimes we talk ourselves out of our pain. It's much easier to do that sometimes.
And for good and for bad, parents or caretakers, they are that role model for children to follow when it comes to the way we eat. If you eat only junk food, the child will follow. If you don't eat enough, the child will follow and develop those same manifestations of an eating disorder, or disordered eating, as you put. And I think that's probably the more common that most people tend to experience. And it's not just counting calories or, oh, maybe I shouldn't eat that, but it's almost like, you need this food and you shouldn't eat it, or you prevent yourself from fully digesting it. And it seems like a very painful way to live your life. So after the journaling and all of that, what would you recommend for some of the youngsters on how to feel comfortable in their own skin and how to look at food as a friend, not a foe?
That's a really good way to put it, looking at food as something that's really there to take care of us and sustain us. I think the number one piece of advice that I have is for parents and kids to really read Taking Up Space together. It's a really great way to have a conversation. I worked hard to put characters in this book who sort of are all the people that we see in our lives. Sarah's mother is really struggling on her own painful journey with food. And her dad is somebody who doesn't really understand why it's such a big deal. And I think we all know, many of us know people in our lives who, there's generations and families who are struggling with food. And there's also people that don't really understand. And there's a way for adults and kids to really come into this book and find themselves and have real conversations. I think it's an uncomfortable topic. A lot of us feel shamed about our bodies, about what we eat. Even the language that we use to talk about food is complicated, and it makes us not want to talk about it because it's uncomfortable.
That's true.
And so we avoid it. And this book, Taking Up Space, is really a way for us to come together and have a conversation, to open up this dialogue in a real way. And parents who feel like they don't have the answers will feel safe reading this book because the answers are in here. There's a safety net.
Thank you so much. Taking Up Space, it'll be available May 18th, so make sure you check it out. I want to thank you for your time. Thank you so much for sharing this.
Thank you for having me.
We're back in 2 minutes.